will not see. They'll jail themselves and call the bars Homeland Security.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're finishing up on All Wars Are Banker Wars. And we all need to recognize this is what all these wars have been about. Private central banking, enlarging their domain, imposing their will on nations that do not want it, imposing their system on the rulers of nations who do not want it. Bribery, blackmail, assassination, they will do anything to maintain their stranglehold on the productivity of the world's people. And as long as private central banks are allowed to exist, inevitably, as the night follows the day, there will be poverty, hopelessness, millions of deaths in endless world wars until the earth itself is sacrificed in flames to Mammon. The path to true world peace lies in the abolishment of all private central banking everywhere, and a return to the state-issued, value-based currencies that allow nations and people to become prosperous through their own labor and development and efforts. Now, earlier in the show, I mentioned the Knights Templars. Prior to the Knights Templars, Christianity, like Islam, forbade usury, because Christianity, much of Orthodox Christianity, came out of Rome, and they had seen firsthand what debt-based economies do, even to the Roman Empire. They'd seen it firsthand. So they had a ban on usury. And the Knights Templars were able to basically either bribe or blackmail the Pope to get a special dispensation that allowed them to rent money, is what they called it. They didn't call it usury, they called it renting money. A lot of modern predatory banking practices were pioneered by the Knights Templars. And they plunged Europe into hopelessly unpayable debt until finally French King Philip IV, otherwise known as Philip the Fair, did the only solution he could do. Because he understood, as long as you believed in the rules of the bankers, as long as you played by the rules they created to serve themselves, you are hopelessly trapped. And so Philip thought outside the box, and I know he's demonized for it, but in looking at the history of the Templars, it was his last resort. He sent messages to all of the regions in France, secret orders on the same time, in the same moment, on the same day. All of the Templars were arrested. And their commanderies, which is what they called their banks, were broken into, looking for looted wealth. They didn't find a lot of it. It was a paper empire, just like the Federal Reserve is. It's all based on paper. There's nothing of any real value there. It's all paper notes. And he sent the Templars to prison and execution, except for Scotland and Portugal, where the Pope and King Philip IV really didn't have a lot of control, which is good for me because my Templar ancestor was in Portugal. And it sounds extreme, but I think the governments of the world, looking at the situation, looking how close we are to seeing this current world conflict emerge into a full-blown global thermonuclear war, that maybe they need to start thinking about the wisdom of King Philip the Fair and say it's time to simply grab all these private central bankers all at the same time so they can't simply skedaddle from one nation to another and come back and try the same thing again, as they will inevitably do, because these people are addicts. They're hopelessly addicted to other people's money. That's why we call them money junkies. When we see somebody who's addicted to cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin, and we can easily see how they're destroying their home and community around them. Now we need to look at these money addicts and look at how they're destroying the entire world around them. And it's time for an intervention. It's time for us to become private central banking heretics, to stop believing that this is the way life is supposed to be. Because it isn't. It isn't even the way the United States was actually started. And they're trying as hard. Look at the destruction of our nation. We used to be the world's greatest nation. Now the most generous estimate is we're down to number 16 and still falling. And yet, despite the destruction to our nation, its infrastructure, its children, its quality of medical care, the quality of its manufacturing output, we still are compelled somehow to go out and force this same banking system onto the rest of the world at the point of a bayonet? Does that make any sense at all? Not to a rational human being. To a money junkie, yeah, it's perfect. But we're really at a crisis point in history. And the first step to resolving that crisis, to not let it go any further into a potential nuclear war, is to recognize that private central banking, ruled by manufactured illusion of debt, is no more legitimate a system of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. We all need to recognize the true cause of all the pain and suffering and wars. It's not the terrorists, it's not Al-Qaeda. These are just distractions and set pieces put in front of your eyes so you can't see the very clear pattern behind much of modern human history. It's a war of banking systems, with the predatory private central banks seeking to eradicate any nation and any ruler that would dare try and operate their economy outside the control of the private central bankers. That's the real cause for the war. Is it something you're willing to fight and die for, to support these private central bankers? Is it something you're willing to let your sons and daughters and brothers and sisters be blown to bloody bits for? So the money junkies can have their latest fix, just a little tiny bit more gold or a little larger number on the bottom of that brokerage statement, so they can have today's thrill, their fix of money that is bought with the blood of your children? I don't think so. But the time has come to point out what really is the cause of all causes behind all the wars and suffering that our planet is having to endure and our people are having to endure. The common enemy of all humankind are private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And as history will show, they will do anything, up to and including global wars, to keep their lock on yours and your children's future economic well-being and productivity. We're not a free society. Media will tell us that we're free, but we're not free. We are slaves. Our slave chains are made of paper, and that paper is the Federal Reserve note. Too few of our leaders have tried to stand up to this system of enslavement, usually with lethal results. But if all the people of the world at the same time stand up and say no more private central banks, it will come crashing down, just as slavery did, just as rule by divine right did. And then we'll be embarking on a new era in human history, where the emphasis on social development is on the people and not on the money junkies. All righty. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Now, according to a former IAEA inspector who has been to the Parchin site that is currently the hue and cry of the pro-war faction, if you will, there was no evidence of nuclear weapons activity at Parchin. Yes, they have an explosives test chamber. The latest word is they're manufacturing nanodiamonds. But they're waving around weapons of mass destruction to get you, the American people, to send your children in to invade Iran, to impose a private central bank, just like they did in Libya, and to force Iran to sell their oil only for the dollar, to prop up the failed Federal Reserve note. It is that obvious what's going on here. And they've come for your wealth, they've taken your wealth, they're taking your homes, now they're coming for your kids. General Stanley McChrystal has gone public saying it's time for the United States to consider national service, which is the new euphemism for a military draft. He says it's time more citizens serve in the military because, after all, the Army is less than 1% of the population. We've got to have 50% of the population in the military so that the other 50% won't dare to stand up. So they're talking about a draft now. They're talking about coming and, without your permission, taking your child away to throw into more of these wars for the bankers. You're the only one who can stop this insanity. You and all your friends and all your neighbors, You need to understand we're past the time where you can just stand off to one side and hope that if you don't make any noise or you don't speak out, that you will be all right. Germany made that same mistake. And they had to ride their nation down to complete and utter destruction. I don't want to see that here in the United States. But they're talking about coming for your children. They're trying to get the guns, and after the guns it'll be the gold and the silver. And then after that it'll be your children. They're just going to go on taking to serve the wars for the bankers until we, the people, stand up and say no more. Government is not interested in stopping this rush to disaster. The corporate media is not interested in stopping this rush to disaster. The only people who can stop the United States from going off this cliff to utter destruction are you, the American people. And you need to do that. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab some phone calls here. Jim in Louisiana. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, thank you. Well, I think we should probably go beyond just calling these people, referring to these perpetrators as private central bankers and money junkies, and, tell it like it is. These are Talmudic, Zionist, Jewish extremists.
Oh, come on. Did you not hear me talk about how the Knights Templar were the ones who pioneered some of these predatory banking practices? Last I recall from my history book, the Knights Templars were not Jewish and they were not Talmudic. I knew we were going to get a call like this. It's the same thing when you criticize the system. Oh, you're being an anti-Semite, or they're trying to portray you as an anti-Semite. I put that comment about the Knights Templar, and it is true. Much of modern banking practice came from the Knights Templars. And I put that in there specifically to make the point. It has nothing to do with any one race of people. It has to do with money junkies of all races, creeds, colors, religions, and sexual orientations. It's not the people. It's the system. It's the system, and it has failed. All right, Jim in Georgia. Another Jim. Jim, what's going on?
Hello, Michael. I'm surprised you don't live in a cave without being massacred or assassinated. You amaze me. My thoughts are listening to you are very profound. I just wish, we talk about politicians' children being in the service, but I'd like to know of the top 400 money grabbers in the world, how many of their children are on the front lines, let alone just 25 of them fighting for the rights that they want us to give ourselves,
We're not fighting for rights. We're fighting for loot for the bankers. That's it. All of these wars the U.S. is now involved in have to do with financial interests, forcing the world back onto the petrodollar, forcing the world back to Bretton Woods. Ultimately, it's going to fail. Russia and China will not allow that to happen. And that's why this rush to war is so incredibly dangerous.
I've got a grandchild, and he's 2 years old, and I hate to see him fighting for someone's money,
I agree.
I
agree.
But Michael, I don't know how you live in the open. I don't even know how you go shopping without being obliterated. So thank you, Michael, and keep it up.
Thank you. You're right. And it is always, it's a reality everybody has to deal with who's speaking truth to power. And there's two ways to look at that. And there was one attack long ago, but I don't like to talk about it because I figure it'll just encourage them. But way back when I first started doing this, right after the murder of Vincent Foster, that would have been the time to do something about me because there were only a few bloggers. I was blogging before there was the word for it, to be very honest. Today, I am one of tens of thousands out there. And I don't know that having something unfortunate happen to me would really materially change anything. Because there are so many other people out there saying exactly the same thing I am. And if you love your country, or at least the country you thought you were supposed to be living in, you have to be willing to take risks. Just like those soldiers and airmen and airwomen who are over there thinking they're doing something to protect the United States of America. They're being lied to, but they actually think it, and they're willing to take that risk to accomplish what they perceive as a noble goal. And I think everybody who's here in the independent media, myself, Ryan Dawson, Sibel Edmonds, all of these people, they've made that conscious decision. Yes, this could shorten my lifespan. But it's a risk I'm willing to take to try and prevent a global disaster for all of mankind. And that's really kind of where that goes. All righty, moving right along. Behind all the talk about new agreements with Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan and whether the troops are going to come home completely or just in part in 2014, the real agenda is coming out that the United States government is planning a permanent occupation of Afghanistan, more than likely in order to safeguard that flow of opium coming from Afghanistan to the United States of America. Now remember, when Afghanistan was under the control of the Taliban, opium production had been completely eradicated. And as soon as the U.S. goes into Afghanistan, the poppies are blooming. Bumper crops. We have posted all these photos of all these allied troops that are in there with the United States and the U.S. troops themselves guarding and protecting the opium fields, guarding and protecting these huge bundles of opium that are being shipped out. It's like Smedley Butler said, it's a racket. The soldiers in uniform are just the muscle men and the enforcers and the button men for the drug lords, the bankers, the money junkies, and it's all the same group of people. Look how much drug money HSBC was caught laundering. So it's all tied together in a vast criminal enterprise, and it does not exist for your benefit. And you should be very angry. You should be in a blind fury over what is going on. That the nation you thought you lived in has been stolen by the money junkies. Your children's lives have been stolen under false pretenses. Your wealth has been siphoned off on the basis of manufactured illusions of legality and morality. You're being pillaged. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.